algorithms replaced editors.
Yes.
Editors, and you know this, like, you're curious, you have taste, you take those curiosities and tastes and you curate it and you put it into this thing that you send out every month.
Mm-hmm.
That was what a magazine editor was.
Hello, and welcome back to First with me, Deena. When I think back to New York in the 90s, I look back at it with great nostalgia. It's an era that is worth looking back to understand its cultural implications. And who better join me on this discussion than Deena Brown? Deena is the author of this incredible book called Dilettante. It's a memoir that is in part a coming-of-age story, but one that speaks to the heyday of the magazines and, more importantly, those who were at the helm of the most successful magazines of the time. With 25 years at Vanity Fair, Deena was in the belly of the beast. He worked with Graydon Carter, the former editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair. But the series of events that led him to Vanity Fair are nothing short of extraordinary, and in a way reflect the story of New York. Not just in that era, in any era. It was really a New York moment. Deena, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Deena, thank you so much for having me.
Deena, I met you spontaneously. And this is actually how I want to present you. I had no clue who you were. I'm being very honest with you.
Most people didn't, by the way, before I published the book.
And I don't know how. Oh, I know exactly how I got to your book. I subscribed to Airmail, and there was one weekly issue that had an excerpt of your book. And when I started reading it, I immediately downloaded the book. And, it's funny because I'm somebody that I've read all my life. I love reading, especially about people's stories. I think that fascinates me to no end. And I must say, I think I finished it in one day. That's how much I loved it.
Well, I think you did finish it one day. And when you're done, I'll tell you my story of meeting you, but go ahead.
Well, it's so funny because I think this will bring us to the conversation at hand today, because the entire conversation today is going to be about a glorious time. We are both from Generation X, and we are similar in age.
The best generation, by the way, as I like to call us.
I still will insist on it, because we were the only generation that felt like we were 30 at 5 years old and still feel like we're 30 now, which I don't think any other generation can say.
I saw something recently, which was like when we were kids, the local news would do that. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?
Oh, yes.
Because they didn't know where we were.
No.
Like the door
how are they
opened
gonna track us?
in the morning and you disappeared and you showed up at some point.
Well, you showed up, I guess, when the sun went down.
Yeah.
Although my parents were slightly stricter than that, but I get it.
Yeah.
And we're the same generation. I mean, listen, my generation, if I was a really good daughter, a really good girl, my dad would allow me silently to watch the first 10 minutes of Johnny Carson.
Oh, the best.
That was the biggest
Get to
honor
stay up
he
late
could bestow on me.
Yeah.
And the fact that he trusted me not to speak in that monologue was... to this day, I hold that in reverence.
Yeah, I know. I see Johnny Carson clips now, and I have those same memories.
Me
like
too.
The best.
Me too. We're going to have to go back to your backstory.
Yes.
You realize, at least, I know who you are now, and you're a really dear friend.
Yeah.
But for people who have never heard of you, can you just quickly give us a little
I can give like the elevator
Virgin
pitch of what my memoir is. In 1994, I was working in a restaurant. I would barely call myself a college dropout. I went to college for like 6 weeks, and I was like, this is not for me, and this is going to be a waste of money. I dropped out. I was living in the East Village. I needed to work. I needed to pay my rent. I was 18 years old, and I got work in restaurants, as a lot of people do. And I went to work in the kitchen of a restaurant, Tavern on the Green, actually, up in Central Park.
Yes.
I worked
there. An
institution, absolutely. And it was hell working in that kitchen because that was a huge restaurant, and I'd never worked in a kitchen before. I went from there. I worked at another institution called Union Square Cafe, which was down on 16th Street.
Which is still
viable. Yeah, it moved, but it was it was kind of a bit of a literary restaurant. There was a lot of book publishing in that neighborhood.
Yes.
Early 90s downtown New York was still pretty grubby. There weren't that many nice restaurants like Union Square Cafe. So I worked in the kitchen there. And then I decided that kitchen work was not my life. And so I wanted...
What were you doing in the kitchen?
At Union Square Cafe, I was what is called the pastry expediter.
Ooh. That sounds
which means,
exciting.
I know it kind of was. Well, it's funny, and it sort of started my obsession with food and plating of food and how beautiful and artistic you can be with a plate.
Presentations
So I
are,
didn't
yeah.
actually make anything. I just sat there. I worked at night, and the tickets for dessert would come through, and there were probably 8 desserts or whatever, and I had to assemble them, and I had to heat some things up, and I had to use a blowtorch to melt sugar on a creme brulee and things like that. But it was great. It's really good training. Like it's really stressful work because these tickets start coming through.
I think our listeners may not know 90s New York, but I think everybody who doesn't live under a rock has watched The Bear.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
And that really captures something that I never thought of.
Yes,
I must tell you.
The stress,
the agony.
Of the kitchen. Oh, it's really hard. So I decided that wasn't for me. At the same time, I was sort of like, I had some crazy ideas we all did back then that I could be a rock star, and I was playing in some bands, and none of them were any good, and it was never going to go anywhere. So I got a job. I decided I needed to get a job where I made tips because you would make more money. And I walked into a place called 44 in the Royalton, and I didn't know what it was other than a friend of a friend sort of said like, oh yeah, my cousin works there and they make $300 a night or something. I was like, shit, I gotta.
Absolutely.
That's what I want.
Wow.
So I walked in there. I got a job as a barback. I couldn't be a bartender because I was only.
You have to explain barback for
so
people that don't know.
A barback is not the person that serves you drinks. It's like the kid that runs around and like refills ice and like cleans glasses. And if you run out of Stoli, you run and get another bottle of vodka.
So like a busboy would be?
Kind of. It's like the busboy for the bar. But you made a lot more money because you got a percentage of the bartender's tips, and they made the most money there. So I was probably making as much as the waiters. And it was great, and I could steal liquor. You know, I would like sneak bottles of really nice cognac into my jacket on the way out. So I was doing that, and 44 at the time, and obviously,
44 was the center of the universe.
Oh, I mean, it was
to me. At least.
I think in my book, I think I referred to it as the cultural center of New York. I mean, it was where everything was happening. It was where media, fashion, the art world, and back then, you know, pre-2000s, it was like no one gave a shit about bankers. Bankers were and Wall Street and finance people for the most part were not part of the social fabric of New York. They were sort of like they worked way downtown.
Unless they were moguls, and some of them would go to the Four Seasons.
Yes, well, because they
I remember this.
Yeah, absolutely. The ones at the top who were like paying for everything, they got a seat at the table. But New York,
but traders, no.
No, I mean, New York was
or finance guys.
Yeah, I mean, there was no, like, you wouldn't see them. They would take the train from Greenwich to, you know, the city. They'd go to work and then they'd go back. New York was a creative city. It was a city that was run by creative people. And whether it was fashion, whether it was media, whether it was publishing, the art world, like those are the only people that mattered. And 44 at that moment was where everybody had lunch. And it was the power lunch spot, and you know it would be everyone from Jackie Kennedy and Calvin Klein and Karl Lagerfeld and all the editors from Condé Nast.
Yeah.
You know, it was around the corner.
It was right around the corner.
And so every single day, you know, it was Tina Brown had one of the booths, and Anna Wintour had one of the booths, and Cy Newhouse, the owner of Condé Nast, had one of the booths, and Graydon had one of the booths, and I just started to learn who people were and who sat where and who was important. You could tell if someone had a good week, they had a slightly better table. And so it was sort of really interesting to watch that and start to get an understanding of how the world works.
But also the hierarchy.
Oh, totally.
It really, actually, if you observe it long enough, it's an education.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
actually know how things work just by observing what is happening in that room.
That's right.
And who talks to who.
And what's amazing is that I remember, you know, the manager became a very good friend of mine, Jonathan Moore, who opened a restaurant called Bond Street a few years later, which is still one of my favorites.
Amazing.
And go if you're ever in New York. You know, people would call. They knew table numbers. Like people would call and say, "What table number am I at?" And they'd say, "Well, you're at table 16." And they say, "Shit, that's not good enough," and they would cancel their reservation.
Were they at liberty to share? So, you know, the person answering the phone, were they able to tell
Probably
them?
not. They were probably directly calling the owner, who was Brian McNally, or they were calling Jonathan and saying, "Where am I sitting?" And there were people. I remember Art Cooper was the editor of GQ for a long time.
Genius. Hello.
And for some reason, Brian McNally and Art didn't get along, and so Art came in for lunch one day, and Brian gave him a really shitty table. And he looked at it and just walked out and never went back to 44 and went to the Four Seasons for lunch every day. And in fact, this is kind of this might not be true, but I've heard it is. And I looked for it online. I couldn't find it. Apparently, the term Siberia, for being banished to Siberia in a restaurant, came
Stems
from
from
a
that?
review, a New York Times review of 44.
Wow.
I might have made that, but I've heard that
No,
from a
no,
few
no.
people.
But this is
Yeah.
interesting. It actually makes me want to do the deep dive now
Yeah.
and find out
I
where it was
couldn't-
coined
I
and
couldn't-
how.
I couldn't find it. Didn't go that far back
Okay, that's
online.
amazing.
So anyway, long story short, we were used to cater parties for a lot of people, a lot of the regulars. We used to throw parties. Tina Brown, and they would hire Brian McNally and his staff and the chef. The chef was actually Jeffrey Zakarian,
Oh, wow.
who went on to become a really famous TV chef and
That
is
is
still
incredible.
around. A young Jeffrey.
Well, no, but two things I want to go back to
Yeah.
before you
Yeah.
continue, if you'll allow me.
Yeah.
First thing, something I share with you, and I
Yeah.
think that's really what made me want to meet you really badly. The Royalton and 44 in particular has a very special place in my heart
Yeah.
because that's where my husband proposed to me.
But that tells you how special it was.
I remember he was staying at the Royalton, and
Yeah.
back then, staying at the Royalton, that whole
Oh, it
Philippe
was-
Stark, Steve
Oh
Rubel,
yeah,
Ian Schrager,
But it was
the entire
it was
thing.
rocks. It was the hotel was full of rock stars and movie stars and
Absolutely.
supermodels and. I
And
mean,
it was the second
yeah.
one after there was the first one, Morgan's.
The Morgans. Yep, that was their first.
And then this one before
Yeah.
the Paramount.
Yeah.
And this was the era before people
Yeah.
even understood the idea of a boutique hotel.
That's right.
With hiring really
That's right.
good-looking people to open the door
But
for you.
by the way, to go even further back, the two men who opened Morgan's and then the Royalton were Steve Rubel and Ian Schrager,
Schrager from
who,
Studio 54.
So it all ties together. Like the
Absolutely.
history of the social history of New York City always, like you can always follow it back a little
That's
further.
very true, and it becomes like a full circle.
And they served prison time, and they
Yes.
couldn't get a liquor license, so they couldn't open a restaurant or a nightclub. So they're like, well, let's open a hotel. And what they did, accidentally, because they couldn't get a liquor license, they had to hire a restaurateur to take the restaurant space
Exactly.
in the
So
ground
they
floor.
could get-
And so all of a sudden, now that's all there is. Like before that, you would never give up. That's valuable revenue
course.
like room service and serving drinks and
Yes,
serving
that's
food.
actually how hotels usually make money.
Absolutely. But now you have to bring in a famous chef and a
Yes.
restaurateur to do it. And that was the beginning of that. And it was just, it was, they had to do it. Like it wasn't,
It was
wasn't
necessity.
thought out. But so I met Graydon Carter. We started catering. He had just become the editor of Vanity Fair in 1992. So he'd been there for about a year. And he had bought a beautiful apartment in the Dakota on 72nd. I mean, stunning,
Yeah.
really beautiful. He had 4 little kids running around, and he used to host dinner parties there.
For people that don't know,
Yeah.
Dakota is famous for two things, at
Yes.
least in my mind.
Yes.
The movie Rosemary's Baby,
Yep.
and that John Lennon
That's right.
was shot outside.
That's
he
right.
lived there. But many famous luminaries have lived at
yeah.
the Dakota for years
Yeah.
and still do.
And still do.
actually.
I think Yoko Ono still lives there.
Yes.
It's iconic.
So you're at this event.
Yes, and I wasn't even waiters, and I was sort of like in the back serving drinks and cleaning glasses.
Mm-hmm.
And I met Graydon. He was an incredibly nice guy, and he talked to he actually talked to the staff and said thank you, and gave us an envelope with $100 in it at the end of the night. A very
very
nice
generous.
guy. He had 4 little kids were sitting there doing their homework at the kitchen table while this dinner full of fabulous social people and celebrities and writers were in his living room at tables set up. And I still don't have a good answer for what happened next. But 6 months after that first dinner, and maybe we'd done 3 or 4 at his apartment, I get a call on my answering machine at home. It was Brian McNally from 44, the owner of 44, who was very good friends with Graydon Carter, and a lot of these editors were good friends of his. I got a phone message from a woman with a British accent saying, Mr. Carter would like to interview you for an assistant position that's open. Please call me back and we'll set up a time.
Wow, but that's just so
Like,
random and insane.
100% out of the blue. And I was like, me? Like, I didn't know how to tie a tie. I didn't own a suit. Like, I didn't, whatever. And I lived with my brother who was 5 years older and was was beginning his career, and so I had to borrow a suit from him. He had to tie a tie for me, and I went into this interview not knowing what I was doing. Like I had no idea. I didn't know how to type. Couldn't write. Like I was just I wasn't. I was a terrible student when I was a kid, and I was just like I was out all night. I was playing in bands. I was like, me? Like, what is this? But I was like,
but there must have been something he saw in you that you didn't.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And I think there's like a history of I'm going to give this kid a chance. Let's see what he does.
That's something, by the way, I want to point out. This is something that's one of the beautiful things about our era. In the 90s.
Yeah.
I don't think that in this day and age
that happens.
That could ever happen.
Yeah, because you're finding people on LinkedIn, or you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's not...
but also just the culture.
Yeah.
The idea of taking a chance on somebody that you see potential in just because of a gut feeling does not exist.
No, I don't think it happens anymore. It's too risky. It's just too risky.
Because I was just reading a quote on my way here today, and it's from a very good friend of mine who is a fashion critic, and he was talking about, to System Magazine, he was talking about how it used to be a time when creative directors were gods. And now the people running the show are CEOs. And unfortunately, because of that, you see a massive difference in the way things are presented, whether it's a luxury company, a fashion company, and just really all connects.
100%. And I think like it's, there has been a sort of decimation of the creative class. And we'll talk more about this because, I mean, those are really big themes of my book and my memoir and my career is like watching this happen.
Yeah, because how do we help the new creatives coming up? And that's a question I get asked often. What can they do in order to reach where they would like to go?
That's right.
My question to you, I mean, in my case, I would hire somebody on my gut instinct. Would you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you're a believer.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I don't think, whatever university is on your resume or your job experience really explains who you are or what you can do or what you're capable of.
Actually, CVs in general mean nothing to me. I've read some spectacular CVs by people, and in the end, they were really not competent.
Yeah, I think that happens.
Begin to tell you with that
I
measure.
think that happens. Anyway, I'll go back. I'll finish this up. I'm sorry. I said it was going to be a brief elevator pitch, and it's turned into hours. It feels like. So I became Graydon's assistant. This was in April of 1994. He had taken over the magazine a year and a half before, and I don't think he had quite figured out what to do with it.
But also, it's very for people that have not acquainted. It's very tough to fill Tina Brown's shoes.
Absolutely. She relaunched Vanity Fair and reinvented it and made it incredibly successful.
Absolutely.
And she left to go to the New Yorker, and Graydon got the job. And it was a very difficult act to follow. She left while she was on top, which was really smart to do.
Absolutely, but he wasn't little himself.
I
remember Spy Magazine.
Oh, he was a very talented editor, but this was different. This was like the big leagues.
Oh, yes,
this was an international
like
magazine. That's right. And so I came in and watched him turn this thing around and really come into his own, figuring out what it was and how to make the magazine his own, which he succeeded. And I think, it was a number of things. It was, when I started, the O.J. Simpson white Bronco chase was literally like 4 weeks after I started.
Wow.
And that became, that turned Dominic Dunn into the most famous journalist in the world, and we had him.
Yes, you did. And actually, I have a confession to make to you, and I already told you this. I bought Vanity Fair ever since I can remember. So starting with the Tina years, because they were iconic covers. But I remember that the first thing I would look at, I would grab the magazine from the newsagent and immediately flip through the pages to get to Dominic's column, because it was irresistible.
But it was an era where there were rock star writers where
absolutely, but also remember the news sources. There were no. It wasn't like you could look at it on Instagram.
You weren't getting a notification on your phone like this just happened. And Vanity Fair was sort of a necessary part of news and culture.
It was because it gave an input.
Yes.
The difference between Vanity Fair and most of other media outlets, they were just reporting the news.
That's right.
Vanity Fair wasn't just reporting the news; they were actually adding their own.
And because we had access behind the scenes the nightly news, the daily newspapers would tell their story, the who, what, when, where, why this happened. And then we would come in 6 weeks later, because that's what it took to do a story
publish.
and to print it and to publish it. And we would say, well, actually, here's what happened. And here's why it happened. And it was it was the backstory of the news, and it would go deeper. And it would,
No, but it would make the reader, meaning young me, feel like an insider.
Totally, 100%.
And that's, I think, what I thanked Vanity Fair for.
It was very aspirational in that way of like, we created a world that felt unattainable, and we gave you a place to come and into this world.
Yes.
And so I ended up staying. I was at Vanity Fair for 25 years, almost 25 years. Graydon retired beginning of September of 2017. He left in January of 2018. And then most of his staff, we were pushed out the next month.
Yeah, but that's natural.
No. I like no hard feelings. Like you have to.
No, but that's another thing I want to discuss. And I know we're going in and out of subjects. It is very interesting because in that era, even up to 2017, by the way, because people don't realize, it's really like a regime, if you will. So anytime you change the editor or you change the head, whoever comes in. I don't know if it's done on purpose to bring in their people to kind of give the impression that this is my operation. Although, in Graydon's case, he's kept some of the better writers in the magazine.
Yes.
He was clever enough not to let go of them.
And this
they were contracted, I'm assuming.
Well, but you can let contracts go, but to your point before, like it was really successful. Like you can't just get rid of
something.
And so it was a real challenge. Like I got to keep, readers buy this magazine. And we should also say the magazine business was a very successful business at that point.
Yes. We thought it was going to last forever.
Oh yeah, but it was a viable business. I mean, Vanity Fair in good years was making hundreds of millions of dollars in profits from advertising.
Yes.
Like, it was a real business. But so that's my backstory. And then about a year after getting pushed out, I was doing a number of different things. I thought like maybe I should write a memoir about all this. And so I sat down to do it.
And this happened around COVID, correct?
Well, I wrote it during COVID. I sold it in the summer of 2019.
Oh, so earlier.
So earlier, and then I sat on it and was kind of working on it. And then COVID really gave me the time and space to be like, well, what the hell else am I doing? I guess now I can finish my book. So I really finished it. And COVID was an interesting time of introspection and loneliness and being alone that really allowed me the space to sort of explore my brain and my memories and to sit there and read old issues and be like, oh my God, I remember that. And what's the backstory with that? And so it was actually a key part of writing the book, was having that time and that space.
Right? Well, listen, we're glad you wrote the book. Can I just tell you? I mean, for me personally, I think it touched me on a personal level because you are not only talking about some shared experiences, not fully shared, just the generational idea of what it meant to be in New York at that time. But in addition to that, the field in which you were working was a field of high interest to me. But one thing I want to kind of, come back to is back then, magazines reigned supreme.
Yeah.
And they, at least in my eyes, and you can tell me if you agree or you don't, really, they were the arbiters of style, and they told us what was cool.
Yeah.
And now that doesn't exist whatsoever. Yeah. I don't know of a single person that looks at a magazine or a newspaper or a media source as their inspiration of what they should wear, what they should do, where they should eat. What are the pros and what are the cons, you think?
Like we said before, you take the good with the bad. What magazines did, and you were right. I mean, these were, first of all, it was, the mid-'90s specifically, which we now call a golden age. I mean, it was the rise of luxury advertisement.
Yes.
It was the rise of young Hollywood. I mean, every major movie star that is still around, from the Brad Pitts to the Ben Affleck, like they're still here.
Yeah.
They
are.
Almost 30 years later.
Yeah.
They are still our movie stars and they are viable. Like this was a moment where just this whole thing was coalescing. Gen X was sort of rising, like the music, hip hop, was cementing itself as sort of the most important new sort of cultural movement. Like that period in time, culturally, financially, luxury advertising really started exploding. Tom Ford, Gucci, like you think
my
Prada
goodness,
was,
yes.
Miuccia Prada was, and like all this stuff. It was like, wow. And we were getting all this advertising pages and all this money. But it was, what the internet does is it brings the world to you, right? It brings everything to you. Back then, magazines were the thing that did that. If you were growing up in Des Moines, Iowa, and didn't want to become a farmer or whatever, and you were like, I got to get out of here.
Yes.
What else is going on in the world? Magazines were your link to the world.
They were.
Whether it was Rolling Stone or Spin or Vogue or Vanity Fair or whatever it was, like this showed you like, wow, there's a big world out there and there's a lot going on.
Yes.
And I can get out of here. Or I can stay here and create a bigger world here. Or I can go, and I think that also the appeal of New York is like because media and culture was so centrally located in New York for so long that it attracted certain people who then would go into the magazine business. Then it would feed back to the next generation that was out there looking. So magazines were our only link to the outside world and to culture and to art and to fashion and this is the way they're dressing in New York. I'm going to try to dress like that.
Yes.
Technology totally killed the magazine. I mean, it just completely killed the magazine.
And I think certain companies saw it earlier than others. And I think some people really didn't think it was a thing.
No.
They thought it was a fad,
That's
and
right.
they had to pay the price later.
It was a very successful business. I mean, it was one of the most, it wasn't Time Inc. that just put out weeklies. It was like these big, glossy, beautiful monthlies that people would leave on their coffee table because it said something about who you are.
Yes.
And it was a cultural signifier. You asked me, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? I don't necessarily that's a really hard question to answer. Am I sad that social media and the iPhone and technology killed magazines? Because I think magazines were like a truly creative, beautiful thing. I think more importantly, and this is where I'm going to say it's a bad thing, is algorithms replaced editors.
Yes.
Editors, and you know this, like you're curious, you have taste. You take those curiosities and tastes and you curate it and you put it into this thing that you send out every month.
Mm-hmm.
That was what a magazine editor was. Like
Absolutely.
it was someone that a reader ended up trusting. Like, well, I trust that these guys are telling me the right thing and the real thing. And this is what I want to see.
That's the thing.
When they were, and it wasn't. It's totally subjective. It's not objective. Like it's
and I'm not going to say there were not ulterior motives sometimes, and I'm not going to defend or deny.
Of course.
Obviously, advertisers have a big say because financially it has to make sense.
Absolutely.
But I'll tell you what I thought about all of this.
Yeah.
I admit, if, for instance, technology had elevated taste, I left the 90s thinking we were going to go even further.
Yeah, yeah.
And lo and behold, the 2000s arrived, and it felt like everything got dumbed down.
Yeah.
So it was the opposite. There was this amazing, optimistic
Yeah.
feeling that I had in the 90s. I was like, I can't wait to see,
What
it
comes
felt like
next.
the movie Gattaca.
Yeah.
That's where I thought we were going.
Totally, yeah.
I really thought it was going to be clean and,
Yeah.
even more elevated.
Beautifully tailored suits.
Yes,
and
chic.
Yeah.
And I must say that no algorithm in the world is going to be able to duplicate, and I'm sorry if you're going to call me an old-timer, a personal touch.
No. And this goes back to an editor's job was to tell you about and to sell you on something you didn't know about and didn't know you wanted or didn't know you needed. What an algorithm does is it gives people what other people like you are interested in.
Not quite the same thing.
No, and it's
not aspirational.
It's like 180 degrees. Like it's completely different. And what you end up having is, from book publishers to Hollywood to television executives to whatever, saying, well, this worked, and we know this because now we have data. There was never data. There was never science to what we did. You look back at Robert Evans running Paramount in the 60s and 70s, and it was like, they wouldn't make The Godfather now.
No, I know.
With an unknown.
They actually didn't want to make it then.
No, they didn't want to make it then.
But he went on a gut feeling.
Yeah, and he was like, well, there's something great here, and made one of the greatest movies in the history of cinema. And now you would be able to say, like, well, let's look at the numbers. Well, our viewership skews slightly younger and slightly more female. They're not going to be interested in this character.
And so this explains all these sequels on superhero movies. What I'm hoping for is that there is some resurrection on the idea of taste making.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it will have to come back. Like everything in life, fashion is a cycle, and Hollywood is a cycle.
Yeah.
Everything is a cycle, and I'm hoping that they will come back to a time in which people say, "Wait a minute, we may want to talk to people that know what they're doing, and we want to hear from them." And it doesn't matter whether I hear it from a hologram or an AI talking to me. I don't care.
Ultimately, it will.
I welcome that.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be in the format of the old way, like reading a magazine, but I'd like to be able to know better information.
Yeah. And I think, the flip side of this whole technology conversation, the tastemaker conversation is, there is an upside to it, right?
Yes.
Which is kids can actually now and people sneak through the algorithm system and emerge
Absolutely. They're
out
very
of
clever.
nowhere. I mean, Justin Bieber came from YouTube, and Lana Del Rey was making YouTube videos. These people now do have access to a global audience without having to mortgage your life to a record company and deal with their marketing and whatever. So there is some authenticity out there, and there are platforms now. You can put your stuff on Spotify, and it might be hard to break through, but you can.
Yes, you can.
And that's a
you
really
don't have
good
to go
thing.
through the middleman.
And that's a really good thing.
It really is. So I have a question for you. In all of your years, whether at Vanity Fair or outside of it, who do you think left the most impression on you? Somebody that really, truly, meeting them really, and it's not about being a celebrity, by the way. It can be anybody.
What's funny is there's a writer I worked with, and he became a dear, dear friend of mine named Adrian Gill, and he went by the pen name A.A. Gill.
Yes,
and he was one of
controversial writer.
Kind of. No, he was considered controversial. He was a food critic for the Times of London, and maybe one of the most famous food critics in the world. He was a very big writer, and he became the first writer I worked with. I think I met him in about 2000, and America didn't really know who he was, and he did something that wasn't done in America, which is just ridiculously honest and funny when he did his restaurant reviews. And he ended up he wrote travel pieces, and he was a brilliant writer, but he wasn't a trained writer. And Adrian was just a really wonderful friend and a really, really funny and brilliant writer. But he was dyslexic as a kid, and growing up in
England,
in England, I guess anywhere in the sort of 60s and 70s, it was like they didn't know what to do with these kids, like who couldn't read or write.
They didn't even know what dyslexia
and it was like, how do we do about this? So him being a writer was sort of an absurdity, and he ended up, he bounced around, and he was like, he worked in restaurants, and he was cooking, and he was actually teaching cooking. And this wasn't probably until he was about 40 years old that he was teaching cooking, and the editor of Tatler at the time, and it wasn't Tina Brown, it was later, she'd already come over. The editor of Tatler was taking lessons from him and said, have you ever thought about writing about food? And he said, well, I can't write. I'm dyslexic. That's why I do this. And she said, well, we could figure it out. And they figured it out. And he would write on a pad of paper in fragments and in sort of his own language that he could read, but that nobody else, and I'd seen those. It'd be like these are like numbers and symbols and stuff. But they figured out a system, and his system was that he would dictate it over a phone to someone, and they would take it, and then he'd work with an editor and do it. And he became a really successful, really well-known, and really brilliant writer.
And he left an impression with
No,
you.
he absolutely did. And he did something which I remember it was described once as interviewing a place. He wouldn't go and talk to people he would just go to a place, and all the mad thoughts in his head and funny thoughts in his head, he would just sort of look around and write his piece based on what he saw and what he thought. And that was really great because there was like no self-consciousness. It was like, fuck it, I'm just going to write like what I see, and I'm going to, whatever I want, I'm going to tie it all together. And the fact that when I sat down to write my book proposal, it was like, oh God, Adrian wasn't a writer and he was dyslexic and he couldn't. I'd written small things, but I'd never written anything as big as a book. And I was like, I could do this. Like I need to just like go in with no fear and just write and get the words out.
Yeah,
and
but you know what, Dana? Can I tell you, just as a reader, what I love about your writing more than anything is something you share with Dominic Dunn.
Yeah.
You make me feel like you're talking to me.
Yeah.
Like we're sitting down, like we are now, and we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel forced.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like you're talking down at me.
Yeah.
And that is a quality that's very rare in writers.
You know what? Over all my years at writing, like that, the one thing I learned is that the best writers, and by the way, it's a huge compliment, and I thank you
and I
so
mean
much
it.
for saying that.
I truly mean it, objectively.
And that was, I mean, it was purposeful, but also I'm lucky that it came out that way. But the best writers are somehow able to write like they speak. And it's not.
I think so.
It's not stiff, studied, educated writing that you would write a scientific paper with that you learned in school. It's just something that it's this funny process of like if you can tell a story with your voice or you whatever, if you can figure out how to get that down on paper so that when someone's reading, it feels like someone is talking to you, not at you, but talking to you, and it's a conversation. It's like that's the key. That's the key to great writing.
I agree, but guess what? I think it's innate.
I do 100%.
I think you either have that or you don't. Yes, you can take writing lessons. Yes, you can go to school for it.
It's not something you can learn. It's something that can appear in your life, but it's not something you can learn. It's something that happens by some weird osmosis, whether you're a perfect example of this, and my friend Griffin Dunn, you were talking about Dominic Dunn.
Yes, and we were talking about his book.
And his book is
also couldn't put it down.
Spectacular. Yeah, I couldn't either. I was like, I got right
no,
through
only because I thought I knew everything.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
No.
And that, I think I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa, where have you been hiding this all those years?
Yeah. No, exactly.
And of course, Griffin was the first one in his family, weirdly. You remember how we had this conversation in which most people think of Dominic Dunn or think about John Gregory Dunn before thinking of Griffin?
Yeah.
For me, my introduction to the Dunn family was actually Griffin.
Yeah. I think mine might have been too. I think mine might have been too, actually. I didn't know any of the history.
No, I didn't know they were related.
And it's funny because I knew Dominic, and Griffin has become a friend of mine, and I adore him, and he's just a wonderful human being. But I knew Dominic for probably 2 decades before I ever met Griffin.
Yeah.
But Griffin is not a writer. Griffin didn't go to college. Griffin went straight into the acting world. Griffin, I think is dyslexic also and struggled in school. He read a lot. He's a smart guy. He's very cultured. He's very curious. And in his, and sort of like me, but he in his first try, he was somehow able, because I read that book and I feel like I'm having a conversation with Griffin.
Yes, but also it comes from the heart.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally honest, and he opens, and that's also a key, especially in memoir. But there is this moment, and I can't explain it. I don't know how it happens, but there is this moment when you hand over that thing to someone, you're like, what do you think of this? And they go, yeah, no, this really sounds like you. And that's the only way it works. That's the only way it works. Like it has to feel like a conversation.
You know what? You're absolutely right. And I'm happy that you told us this because I think that's very important for everybody. I'm sorry I've kept you for so long, Dana. I only have a few last questions.
I'm in no rush. This is really
good.
fun.
Okay. So what has been your most exciting discovery? This is, by the way, my version of the Proust questionnaire in the last page of Vanity Fair.
Terrifying. I'm not prepared for this. What has been my? You know what? I think it's a continuation of what I was just saying to you. Is that I never set out to be a writer. I didn't think I knew how to write, and God, this is going to sound so pretentious. If you're a creative person, and I always have been, I put a math equation in front of me or science, and I'm like, I don't and it was like for a while it was music. I was playing music when I was a kid, but I wasn't great at it. And I can't draw or paint. Like I was always a creative kid. I always struggled in school because they don't recognize creative kids, most schools. Nowadays it's different, but back, especially when we were, it was like,
but also you didn't fit into a box.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
I get it, because I never fit into a box.
No, exactly. And I think discovering writing and discovering that as hard as it can be, I really like doing it. And it's the only place I can just put fear and judgment aside and just sit down and write this thing and being like, I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to do it. And finding that outlet, finding that creative outlet that you like doing, that you feel like, well, I'm pretty good at this. I'm okay at this. I'm not bad at this. I can do it. Finding a creative outlet. And it's a great life lesson, by the way. Like finding that thing you are good at and really like doing and figure out how to make a living and doing it. You know, and I've been reviewing restaurants at Airmail and writing about food for the past couple of years. And it's
your last article made me laugh out loud.
And but it's nice to it's really good to discover that, because if you don't discover that creative outlet and that thing you're at least decent at and like doing and can do, it's like you're in trouble. You know what I mean? It's really hard.
There are lots of people that
and
don't.
So that's been a great. I mean, that's a little selfish to talk about myself
not
like
at all.
that.
I actually love that answer.
But
I love that answer.
But it's a really nice feeling to then have people.
Well, thank you for that, because that nice feeling is a nice feeling for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, my greatest discovery is reading. What I love about reading, Dana, I'll tell you exactly, and I know I'm not the one being interviewed here, but I'll tell you what I love about books, whether it's memoirs or historical novels, is I become not only the lead actor, but the screenwriter, the cinematographer, and the director of my own motion picture.
Yeah.
And no other thing in this life makes me feel as immersed, as diving
because it's
into a book.
just you. It's you and words and your imagination.
Exactly. And I love how no two people see it in the exact same way.
That's right.
Because I was watching something yesterday in which they were talking about a book, and they said, it's the same book. Why are you reading it over and over again? They're like, the book is the same, but you're different each time.
And you see it differently, and you see different things, and different things reveals.
That's so poignant. Agreed. What is your most treasured possession?
Oh, boy. God, I was going to say my kids, but then calling my kids a possession sounds really, really awful.
By the way, possession can be your love for your kids.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a tangible possession.
Okay, because I don't want to call my kids a possession. Of
course not, I get it.
That sounds like this is like the 12th century and I'm like a king or something. I think it's I have two kids. I have a 19-year-old and I have a 14-year-old. And I forget what life was like before that. And I'm like, why didn't I have kids earlier? This is I really dig my kids. I really like them.
Aww.
I mean, they drive me crazy sometimes.
Join the club.
But I really, really like being around them. And it's sort of, my daughter's at college now. My son has 3 more years. And then it's like, oh my God. Then what?
Then you go back to where you started.
Yeah, and you go, what am I now? And who am I now? Because my identity for the last 25 years. So I think, I guess my kids aren't the possession, but my sort of feelings for them and joy in hanging out with them is really great.
Hey, that's the perfect answer. Thank you so much, Dana. Oh my God, I don't want this to end. I can stay here for days.
Well, I'll tell this really quickly before we go. I think you reached out to me on Instagram, and you're right. You probably read the book overnight, because
I did.
I think you were literally the first stranger, the person I didn't know, that reached out to me, and you were like,
I took a chance.
And I was like, who is this person?
Yes, it's kind of crazy.
But it was really exciting because you clearly had read it overnight. You it clearly hit a nerve. You reached out to me immediately, and I was like, wow. And you get, when you write a book, you get a lot of that, especially on Instagram, because you're using it to promote, and so you get it. And so you were literally the first one, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe someone actually read my book. I can't believe someone actually liked it. And this is like a real person who's been in the business before, and this isn't some crazy person that lives in a shed in New Hampshire.
No, but also
and so
a
it was
person
really exciting.
That is so not of your world in a sense.
Yeah.
Weirdly.
Yeah.
Yes and no.
And then I went out and had dinner with you and your husband, and you've become dear friends, and I adore you guys.
We adore you.
I'm so thrilled you're doing this, and I'm really excited for you. And I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad we could do this.
Well, thank you so much for joining
Deena,
us.
thank
you. Well, thank you for listening. I'm Deena, and this is First. I'll be back with more soon, so follow the show to stay updated.